For prebiotic, things like asparagus, leafy greens, beets, carrots, like anything that's really got good substantial fiber that can really help feed, because those bacteria like love certain types of fiber. That's essentially like food for them. So that's kind of how you can think about it. Not only are you eating for food for you, but you're also eating for food for your gut microbiome.
Today's episode is with repeat guest, Dr. Halie Schoff. Dr. Halie was on the show a few weeks ago, back when we chatted all about hormones, hormonal imbalances, and birth control. So I'll link that episode in the show notes if you haven't checked it out yet. But a quick refresher on Dr. Halie's background. She is a licensed and practicing chiropractor, integrative health practitioner, and podcaster with a master's degree in applied clinical nutrition. With a focus on women's hormones and gut health, Dr. Halie has helped hundreds of people all over the world regain their health through lifestyle, optimal diet, movement, and functional practices. So in today's episode, we're talking all about gut health. So how gut health impacts hormones and weight loss, underlying reasons for poor gut health, how different issues such as parasites, Candida, and yeast infections actually impact overall health. We're also chatting about probiotics, stomach acid, digestive enzymes, prebiotics, and lots more things related to gut health. So this episode is jam-packed with all the information that you want to know related to gut health. Maybe not all the information, but a lot of information related to gut health that people tend to get confused about. I think you're really going to enjoy it. I really enjoyed talking to Dr. Halie again. So let's jump into part 2 with Dr. Halie Schoff. All right, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and I am here for the second time with Dr. Halie Schoff. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm so excited to be back for part 2.
Yeah, me too. So if you're listening or viewing and you don't know what we're talking about, we recorded a part 1 all about hormones. We talked about birth control, dove into so many different topics within those. So that was part 1. And if you haven't seen that or listened to it yet, I'll link it in the show notes below so you can check it out. But today we're going to talk all about gut health. So I'm super excited for this. This is definitely an area that I'm newer to, and I'm excited to kind of hear your expertise on it. So do you want to just give our listeners a little background, how you got interested in gut health and kind of your journey through it? And then we can dive into, why it's important.
Sure. So it's so funny because like our last conversation, we kind of had that pain to purpose, right? So I talk about like my hormone issues, how I got into the hormone realm. And then I kind of, with all things in the body, they don't work independently of each other. Like everything works together. And so gut so much so works with all the hormone stuff, but there are so many gut things like bloating, constipation, acne, all of these different things that can show up, food sensitivities that I experience, but then also a lot of people that I work with experience. And so that's what really got me down this rabbit hole of like, what are the root causes for these people's issues? Like why, like a lot of people get bloating. Like this is kind of my thing, is demystifying the fact that bloating, although millions of fitness influencers will say it's normal, it's not normal. And that's kind of like my thing now. People send me like all of these things that fitness influencers do, showing their belly as it grows throughout the day as they eat. And they're like, it's normal, it's cool. And they're like, check this out, check this out. So because I used to be there, I used to be super bloated. I mean, I looked at all like the fitness supplements and like just garbage that I was taking to be like fit and healthy, and like how it just so backfired. And so then it really got me down this realm of like, okay, so much stems from our gut health, whether it's immune, skin, hormonal, digestive, obviously, mood. I mean, so many different things that I was like, this is honestly like ground zero where people really need to be focusing, but like everyone wants to focus on like the brand new shiny thing, like that's not related to gut health. Cause it's, people don't want to, frankly, they don't want to stop what's making them sick in the first place, or they don't want to, minimize the products that could have ingredients in it that are causing the bloating or causing the digestive stress. And so especially now, so I've really gotten into the realm of really working with people on especially pretty severe gut stuff, whether parasites, yeast, Candida, and like just really how that can have a systemic effect on the body. And I know that might be like the first time people are hearing of these things, but clinically I see them all the time. So I've learned a lot along the way, and I've really I've really worked to perfect my craft and really helping people uncover why the gut might be kind of the go-to place for their healing journey.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah. I mean, I think with gut health in general, like there's just so much that it can be super overwhelming. Even for me, like so many different topics to go down, and like with bloating itself, like I feel like there's so many different things that can cause bloating for different people. But maybe we can kind of start off by chatting about some of maybe the most common kind of underlying issues that you see that kind of lead to poor gut health, or maybe lead to things like bloating that people might not understand.
Yeah. So big kind of root cause things. I mean, I think stress, again, like this was kind of our thing with hormones, but stress also has that effect with gut health, because stress can come in a lot of different things. Like when we are like emotionally stressed, your stomach hurts, right? Like you feel like that pain in your stomach, that gut feeling, right? Like that's literally that connection between your gut and your brain. So, I mean, stress really can impact it, and stress can really create micro trauma to the gut lining and create kind of leakiness, right? Like we've kind of probably all, maybe we've heard of leaky gut, or intestinal permeability is kind of like the technical term, but leaky gut's easy for people to understand. And so essentially, we think of our gut like being connected. Leakiness is kind of where it more looks like this, where things that we're eating that might not be entering our bloodstream typically are able to get in. And that's why we have more bloating, we have more inflammation, we have more issues with food sensitivities, because these things that wouldn't typically be there are now there. And so stress is kind of that theme. Like I said, it can come as emotional, but it can come as physical, right? Like, are you overtraining, or are you super dieting? Are you not getting in enough nutrients? Are you eating foods that are stressful, like food allergies, food sensitivities? Like if you have those, that's obviously stressful to the gut. Artificial sweeteners is a big one. I mean, it's in every fitness supplement unless you're looking for it. Things like gums, like xanthan gum, can be really, really, really prone to causing bloating. Carrageen is like, or carrageen, and carrageen, it's like a thickener that's usually in like nut milks. Let me think of some other things. There's like a laundry list. Those are just really common ones. Raw foods can be pretty hard for people to digest sometimes, not all the time, but that, like, if you are struggling with bloating, you want to look at that. Things in your environment, right? Like different stressors or toxins that we might be exposed to, creating stress and therefore kind of causing leaky gut, and allowing those junctions between those cells to not be tight, and that not let things, slip in. So people might say like, oh, like I just have acne, I don't have anything wrong with my gut, or oh, I just have like allergies, like I don't have nothing's wrong with my gut. Well, newsflash is that those things are all related to the gut. Like your skin is a direct impact of like what's happening on the inside. Allergy is heavily related to what's going on the inside, especially because 80% of our immune system lives in our gut. So if you are not supporting your gut, you're going to be more prone to allergies, autoimmunity, chronic infections, just because like you're not able to mount that immune response. And so many of these things that people probably aren't thinking of are really heavily related to the gut. And that's why it's just so important. I think, like, although people might not come to me being like, I don't experience bloating, I don't have food sensitivities, I don't have any of that stuff, I'm regular in the bathroom, but like, I guarantee we can find a symptom that's still related to probably needing to have some gut support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Do you feel like, so I guess one of the things that I've always kind of debated or kind of wondered is with these foods like xanthan gum and like the things that we find in nut milks and things like that, are those things necessarily like causing the leaky gut, or are they just like you're reacting to those things because you already have issues going on? Because that's something that I've seen before, I've read before too, like even for myself, like I sometimes use a little bit of xanthan gum like in my protein ice cream to make it thicker. And I've noticed that like just kind of over the years, there's been a few like periods of time that I've had a more of a reaction to that. And I noticed like, oh, like, I've had this protein ice cream the last few nights and it's causing a little bit more bloating and gas or whatever, but that's for like a small-ish period of time. Maybe it lasts for like a month or something, and then I kind of bring it down a little bit and use less, or don't do that. But then I notice like I can bring it back in and I'm fine. So I'm trying to just figure out like, is it these things that are actually causing it, or is there other underlying issues that these things are maybe just exasperating it, and then that's what you're noticing? Is that even a good question?
No, it is. And it's really hard to know, like, is it the chicken or the egg? I do think that those things, like, does xanthan gum cause your leaky gut? Like if you have it one time, no, but like chronic use, like, right. Like everybody always says like the dose makes the poison. And like that kind of is true to a fact. Whereas like, okay, if I had an artificial sweetener one time, not a big deal, but like I was having it multiple times a day, every day in this shitty protein shake that I was drinking. And I was wondering why I was bloated and my skin looked horrible. So, I mean, was that the only thing? No, like there's definitely compounding effects, but what I've noticed is like when we can clean up a lot of that stuff, people notice almost like, not everybody, but a lot of people do notice pretty immediate kind of relief from things because it's taking a lot of stress off the system. So is it directly causing it? I don't know. It depends on like how many other things I feel like probably are involved, but it's definitely not helping the situation. Like it's not helping the body. It's not supporting it really in any way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. And I think that's kind of, when we think about like all the different things that we're consuming, and we talked about this in the other episode with just our environment, not even just the things that we're consuming, but like the stuff that we're putting on our body, like shampoo, lotion, candles being lit, like all this stuff in our environment, the water we drink, all of that, like all of those factors play into it. So I feel like you were mentioning there's so many different compounding factors that, if you have a general kind of base where you're like healthy and good and you don't have tons of these things, then maybe having like a little xanthan gum, is not going to be huge, or like having like, and I'm just kind of thinking about like me, for example, this is a little bit selfish, but I'm thinking about just like how I go about like my regular life is like 80-90% of my foods, right? And the things I do, I try to keep them as quote unquote clean as possible. But then like on the weekend, I'll have a Diet Coke or something and I don't have any reaction to that, but it's not like an every single day thing. And I feel like that it's just, like you said, the dose. What was the saying? The dose, the poison
makes the poison. And I like that saying, but then I don't, because it's like, we can poison ourselves a little. Like, I don't know. I'm a big fan. I agree with moderation, but at the same time, like, I think that looks different for everybody. Cause there's people that are like, well, I'm only having like one protein shake with crappy ingredients, like once a day, like every day, like that's minimal compared to everything else. And I'm like, right. But things add up and they compound. So I guess it really depends, I feel.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, like you said, it's really just, what I think focusing on how you can get things as high quality as possible, because that's just going to compound on itself as well as you kind of move forward. Right. So, yeah, I feel like we could go down rabbit holes on all different ingredients for like hours on end. But yeah, so maybe we can, so in terms of kind of like gut health, there's so many things, with gut health, but with like these underlying causes, like, is there anything in terms of a protocol that you generally start off with someone, or kind of a way to see, like, if they're like, oh, I'm always feeling bloated, I can't pinpoint it to like a specific food. Is there like any kind of way that you start off, trying to unpack what's going on, or like for the listeners, if they're trying to figure out like, okay, what's the first step in trying to figure out how to optimize my gut health, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, in terms of like cookie cutter, like basic recommendations would be like getting the processed food out, because we need to know what's bothering the body. Most of the time it's processed or packaged, or like these unwanted ingredients, like looking at the ingredients and knowing, is this supportive to my body? Is it supportive to gut health? Or like, could this be causing inflammation? Like teaching people what those things look like. So kind of like looking at a lot of the ingredients we've talked about, like the vegetable oils, those are huge for inflammation. I'm trying to think of like other specific ones, but really just kind of getting to whole food and then seeing, okay, how do you react to certain foods? Like if you ate broccoli, like, do you feel bloated? Like, are you journaling that? Are you aware of like, does it matter if it's steamed? Does it matter if it's raw? Does it matter if it's cooked like pretty thoroughly or baked? Like, does that matter? Because that could be an indication of like how your body might be having a hard time breaking it down. Like if you're having a hard time eating raw foods, they are very hard on the digestive system. And so when the digestive system is stressed, I typically tell people to stay away from it. So like the smoothies that they're packing full with raw vegetables, so commend you for doing a good thing with getting veggies in, but like and then you're chugging it down in 3 seconds, that's still a stress to your digestive system. Like the huge amounts of salads that people might eat, and then they feel bloated, and then they wonder why. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a good thing. Why am I feeling bloated? Not your fault. It just could be a lot of stress to your system. So more so like cooking your foods, it really helps support the digestive process. Not eating all the time. Like we've kind of talked about this when you were on my podcast, like with metabolic flexibility, but like we aren't meant to eat 5 to 6 times a day. We aren't meant to eat multiple times a day. And like, that's very, very, very stressful for your digestive system, because your migrating motor complex is kind of what is using to like digest your food, move food along, so that then you can have an empty stomach and like be able to utilize the food that you're eating. But like, that's every pretty much 90 minutes. And some people are eating every 90 minutes to 2 hours. And so it's never giving that a break. And so that's a huge reason for bloating and digestive stress, because we're always like, it's that sip of kombucha, it's that snack out of the fridge you're grabbing, it's that little like nibble of your kid's food. Like, yeah, you don't think it adds up, but like most people are eating and putting something in their mouth that needs digesting, like from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. And like, we just physically are not designed for that. Our animals aren't designed for that. We as humans are not designed for that. And that's placing, I think, one of the biggest stressors on the body. So I think one of the best things that we can do is time restricted eating, or just like some form of intermittent fasting. And I don't like to see that I don't personally think that like when I open my window, I'm not eating every single second throughout my window, because I have a big enough window. It's usually like 8 hours, where like I have a meal, I wait 3 hours, I have a meal, and then like I kind of somewhat space it out that way. And that's really worked for me, because I used to be that person. I was eating every second, and I couldn't think anything about food. But then I was like, why does my digestion suck? So I mean, that's honestly one of the biggest free things that pretty much everybody can do. Like, obviously consult your doctor, like if you're underweight or you have underlying conditions, but for the most part, we all can benefit from some form of just mainly overnight fasting, where we're just not eating and then trying to space out our meals more during the day. Like, that takes nothing except for just mindfulness.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think the awareness piece of it, and then, kind of going back to what you mentioned about, tracking certain things like journaling. I know like with my clients, if we're ever noticing that anything that's going on in terms of like gut or digestion issues, it's always like, all right, let's like track, let's take notes. Like, how do you feel after, like when this happens, like, what did you eat before that? Like, take notes so that we can kind of go back and like assess the week and see and pinpoint where things are happening. Cause that's one of the biggest things too. I feel like a lot of people just don't like track these things or journal them or whatever. And so you're like, oh, I can remember this, but I'm like, I don't even remember what I ate like yesterday night for dinner. I mean, I remember if I think about it, but it's like, you have to really, track these things and make sure that you're paying attention to them if you want to make changes. So
yeah, because so many people are just like out of tune with their body to begin with. Like, they have no idea how food makes them feel. They have no idea like how certain things make them feel. So that's a great way to like be a little bit more in tune with like, oh, this is how I am feeling a little low energy, or I'm feeling sluggish, or I'm feeling bloated. Like, wow, maybe, that morning bowl of oats, like, isn't serving me, or maybe, like this food, whatever it is, like, maybe it's not working for me, just making people a little bit more mindful.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So can we chat a little bit about, because this is a question that I get often from clients, and just in general, I see this kind of circulating, like how gut health affects, hormones, and specifically hormones, and how they relate to fat loss or weight loss. Because a lot of the clients I work with, they're looking to change their body composition, and I feel like there is a lot of misinformation out there, and also just confusing information about how the gut really plays into weight loss in general. So maybe we can tackle that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So they've done a lot of really interesting studies on like fecal transplant. Like, they'll take like twin mice who have identical microbiome, or like they're identical genetically. They will put microbiome, or like feces, essentially like a fecal transplant of an unhealthy mice, into one of the twins, and like that mouse becomes super obese, and like the feeding is the same, the exercise is the same, like literally everything else is the same. I mean, they're genetically identical mice, but the only difference is the microbiome. And so that just makes like me ponder and think how much of an impact this has on like our microbiome has on our body composition, which it really does. I mean, I don't run stool tests often. Well, I do probably once in a while, but like when we can really look at like what's going on and like how much good bacteria, how much bad bacteria, is there yeast, is there candida, is there like an overgrowth, is what is going on, because that's going to affect essentially how you make hormones, how you are digesting and utilizing the food that you're eating, like your metabolism, like it's dictating all of these things. Because when we think of the gut, it's not just like your intestines. It's literally starts from your mouth and it goes all the way to your anus, but it's including accessory organs like the gallbladder, liver, pancreas, like all of those things are involved when I see the gut. It's a very comprehensive picture. And so because of that, like there's a lot going on with all of that. Like that's your hormones, your immune system, all of that. So when there's kind of an overgrowth of things, it allows bad bugs, parasites, candida, yeast, whatever, to kind of take over. And those things can easily have an impact on what you crave. So I work with a lot of people who deal with candida or parasites, and like they have insatiable cravings. Like they are like, I eat so healthy, but like I can't even work past these cravings. And that's because these things literally can dictate what we crave. So that's also kind of another component apart from just a straight microbiome. That's kind of makes it a little bit more comprehensive, if you will. Like it's not as simple as, oh, just take a probiotic and, like you're going to have a great microbiome and you'll lose weight. Yeah, really good probiotics can definitely help that. And just like supporting the microbiome with probiotic and prebiotic-rich foods, super, super great, right? What we're exposed to in our environment. Are you over sanitizing things? Are you like a freak with, all this like antibacterial stuff that's on your hands and then it gets in your mouth? And do you let your kids play, or do you put your hands in the soil? Like, or do you go barefoot? Like all of these things. You have dogs, like that's been shown to influence a positive microbiome and diverse microbiome so much, especially since COVID. So many people have just been like so anti-germ, but like I clinically now see it affect people's microbiomes in a very not beneficial way. So like those really all go into this picture of like, how can we create an ideal microbiome? And really that starts from birth. Like if you're C-section versus vaginal, like you're getting microbiome that is really going to start, like, are you starting off with a healthy microbiome, or are you going to immediately start off needing some extra support? Are you breastfed or bottle fed? Like with formula, like those are just from age. And I could see that in myself. I was a vaginal birth, but I was not breastfed. And like, then I look at my brother and I, and like, he had more skin stuff. I had skin stuff, like the allergies, like so much of it starts to make sense. Not that it's my parents' fault by any means. They just didn't know. Like, that's why I try to do the education that I do, so that people don't have to be like, oh, I guess this is just how it is. Like me and my siblings are like this, and it is what it is. And it's like, yeah, that happened. But like, now how can we support you here and now,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I know for me, I always kind of like looked back at like how I grew up too. Like I grew up in Manhattan in the city. And so I wasn't out like playing in the dirt or anything every day in the backyard. And I feel like same with my sister. And I feel like I grew up with allergies. Like I was on allergy medicine, Zyrtec. Like we didn't have a dog until I was, I think about 6th grade. So there was like, we had all these issues. I had skin issues. We talked about this on the last podcast, like going on Accutane and all that stuff. And obviously there's like a lot that goes into it, but yeah, like you said, just kind of thinking back to that, it's like just crazy. And obviously you can't necessarily like control that. Like you can't control if you're a vaginal or C-section, obviously, right? But it's just being aware. Yeah. There's just so many things that I like go back and I'm like, oh, okay, this kind of like makes sense.
I know it does. When you really paint that picture, it's like, oh yeah, like that does make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned like parasites, candida, yeast. Can we maybe define those 3 things and just kind of talk about them? Because I know people hear those things. They hear like, oh, yeast infections or, parasites or candida. And like, I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what they even are and how you get them and how you mitigate them. So maybe we can kind of just like talk about those 3.
Sure. Sure. So, and SIBO is kind of in that category too. So SIBO is like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So it's a bacterial overgrowth that's happening in your small intestine that can be due to a multitude of different things. One of the biggest things that I find is food poisoning typically triggers it. And Also eating all the time, because that migrating motor complex, it's constantly placing stress on the small intestine to digest food. And that can really give a great environment for bacteria to overgrow. And we really want the majority of our bacteria to be in our large intestine. That's really where they should be, a small amount in the small intestine, but like that's really where people can get that bloating and distension. So we've got that. We've got Candida and yeast, which is more of like a fungus. And so kind of like how you said with yeast infections, super similar. It's just like we have these things always naturally occurring, but like when they are given the opportunity to grow through like a non-conducive gut, or like a not healthy or not ideal gut, these things can grow and populate and reproduce and cause symptoms. And so like, it's not that these things are bad and like we need to kill all of them off and like, oh my gosh, never like, I don't know, make sure you're never exposed to this ever. Like it's good when we're resilient and like we have a little bit of these things just like naturally occurring, because that's it, to a point when they're minuscule, like they're fine, they don't cause any issues, like it's almost like healthy, it's causing diversity. But when they overgrow, that becomes a problem. And they overgrow because of the environment that we cause for it, just like our body. Like we are exposed to viruses, bacteria, et cetera, on a daily basis, or at least we should be. And so why do we get sick when we're exposed to things every day? We get sick when our body, our terrain is in a less than ideal situation, whether we've been undersleeping, undernourished, drinking alcohol, like we're not supporting our immune system, we're not supporting our stress, whatever. Like we all know what that feels like when we, maybe spend a weekend out too long, or where we're traveling and we're super run down. And then it's like, oh, crazy, we get sick. It's kind of like the same thing with your gut, kind of with like, they're there, but like we give it the opportunity to flourish. And then parasites. Oh yeah, we evolved with them. I mean, they're everywhere. They're in food, they're on vegetables, they're in fruits, salmon, meats. They're in the grass. So if you walk barefoot, which I do, our animals are exposed to them. I mean, we give our dogs a dewormer and we don't even think twice about it. And it's like, oh, you're putting her on a parasite cleanse? Like what? Like it's for some reason so weird in America, but like in other countries, it's almost like routine. Like in Mexico and Europe, they take herbs on a regular basis to mitigate these things. And I think a lot of people associate parasites with like traveler's diarrhea, or like going to Mexico and drinking the water, or like, going to a third world country and you drink a little bit of the water and you kind of feel upset for a little bit and then it just kind of goes away. I mean, yeah, that's a part of it. But like I said, do you own animals? Do you let them sleep in your bed? Do you let them lick you on your face? Do you walk barefoot? Do you eat anything? Because like it's not just meat, like it's on pretty much everything. Like I've seen it actually crawling. I took a video and I put out my story a few months ago. I was in Wegmans and like a wild caught salmon, and I could see a physical parasite in there, and like I was touching it, and I mean and people are like, oh my God, I'm never eating salmon again. I'm like, no, like that's not my point. Like it's just in everything. I just happen to see it. And like cooking helps get rid of it. But like, do you like sushi? I for sure do. And like, I just know that I'm exposed to these things. So then I know, okay, like, I probably should support myself. And so I do. I'm actually working through like a 5 to 7 day parasite protocol right now, because we're entering a full moon, which is when parasites tend to be a little bit more active. And so a lot of people are like, well, how do I know if I have parasites? Because like it didn't show up on a stool test. And I will say like most of them don't show up on a stool test, because for stool testing, you take a sample of your poop, you put it on like you send it in, and someone's looking at it under a microscope. And if they don't see parasite eggs, if they don't see visible DNA of parasites, like they're going to say it's negative. And like those things don't just want to come out. Like they are parasites. They live in our body because we are a host for everything they need. They don't just like want to come out and be found on a stool test. So like they're very stealthy. Like they can hide into muscle tissue. They can hide, everywhere. They can hide in your nasal cavity. They're not just in your gut. And this freaks a lot of people out, but it's just honestly the truth that we've evolved and we've lived with these things, and it's not a big deal. And so that's why I'm just a big fan of, we support our stomach acid, we support our gut health, we support maybe ourselves 2 to 3 to 4 times a year with kind of like an herbal parasite cleanse, just to make sure you're getting rid of these unwanted things so that they don't become a problem. And that's totally a possibility. But clinically, I will say that of all things that I just talked about, parasites are the thing that I find the most, and people who would not even expect it. Like we start putting them on a protocol and they're like, I think this is a parasite. And I was like, well, I know that you didn't think that you had any, but if you reach down at your pulse and you feel it, you probably have a parasite. Like that's just the truth. Unless, like I said, you live in a bubble.
Yeah.
Or you're
So
active.
how do you,
or,
sorry.
or if you're just like active about taking things to kind of get rid of them. I mean, that's really it.
So what's like a general protocol for that, or like the one that you're on right now?
So I use the one with Cellcore. You need a practitioner to work through it. Because it works. I mean, like it's powerful. But it uses a mimosa pudica seed, which like it's really great because it works as like a gel as it goes through the intestine. So it can pick up, like as it forms the gel, it can pick up Candida, it can pick up mold, it can pick up like fungus and parasites, and it helps bind them out of the intestine. So I really like that. A lot of their products use fulvic and humic acid, which is essentially like a compound that would be found in like really high quality soil, but it's really, really great for detoxing, binding to things and like helping get rid of the body. It's been found to be really helpful for parasites. So that's personally what I use. And I use certain like supplemental things like coffee enemas. I just did one before we got on this podcast, which I pretty much do those pretty frequently anyways. You can do things like carrots and pumpkin seeds. Those are pretty supportive of it. I don't find that I see much benefit. Like I'm not passing parasites from pumpkin seeds. Some people do, I don't. But like, that's kind of like a whole food version. And then in terms of that, like whenever you are working through like a parasite protocol, you definitely want to make sure your detox pathways are open, because if you are like binding these things like parasites, they hold on to things like heavy metals, mold, and like just toxins that we're exposed to. Like they have, which is protective in a way, they have a high affinity for these things. But like when we're killing these things off and releasing them, that's where people can feel these detox reactions. So I personally have not ever felt these, and people that I work with don't feel them because we use a binder, which is really great because it kind of binds these things so you don't feel it. But you have to make sure you're like well hydrated, hence my amounts of water. You have to make sure you're going to the bathroom every day, because if you're backed up, that's going to be miserable. And then you're sweating, like that's a huge way that we get rid of things. So I use the infrared sauna, castor oil packs, Epsom salts. I'm trying to sweat through exercise. It's hard because it's getting cold here, and I like to work out in our garage. But the other day I was able to just be in a sports bra because the workout was intense. So that's good. But using kind of all of those different modalities to like help get yourself to sweat. And if you're sitting there and you're like, I don't sweat, that's a problem that you want to address. Not like, oh my gosh, that's a problem, go to the emergency room, but like, that's something that that's a protective thing, like that we sweat. So if you don't sweat, we need to kind of figure out why you don't sweat.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like that was very in depth and a lot. I'm even like, oh man, I'm like, there's so many things to kind of like ask questions about. But yeah, I think that was a good overview. I feel like, is there any like practical like takeaway in terms of if someone's listening to this podcast and they've never even like heard about like all of this stuff that you just talked about with like maybe they've heard of parasites before, but now they're just like, oh no, like what if I feel like I have a parasite, I have to go do all this stuff. Like, is there a place that you would just like start in terms of like kind of bringing it like back down to like, hey, let's, like you said, Whole Foods, right? Whole Foods, and starting there is the biggest thing with anything, but anything else like in terms of a lifestyle that can kind of help mitigate any of this stuff?
I mean, coffee enemas are great. Epsom salt baths. Like,
can you explain those in case someone listening doesn't know what a coffee enema is?
Yeah. So coffee enemas, oh my God, they're great. I was very apprehensive about them when I first heard about them, but like they're phenomenal. Essentially you're using coffee to, you're putting it up your butt and it's going through, and it really helps stimulate the liver and the gallbladder. It's more of a liver and a gallbladder support than anything else, but like I've passed liver flukes and gallstones. So it's really therapeutic, like, especially for people who struggle with gallbladder health. It's like, we immediately like go to put them on a medication. It's like, why would we not use something like this? You look on PubMed and it's like the only negative ramifications are like person burns coffee due to heat. And it's like, okay, that's like user error. If that's the only risk, like you can easily mitigate that by making sure it's not hot. My friend Ashleytaylorwellness on Instagram, she has a free coffee enema course that I highly recommend. That's what I used when I first started going through this. But essentially it really helps stimulate glutathione, which is our master antioxidant. And because it's kind of binding and pulling things out, people can pass parasites or things like that. I personally, to my knowledge, haven't. I maybe have, like, like I said, I passed liver flukes, but nothing else to my knowledge. But yeah, you try to hold it in for like 10 to 13 minutes. And I typically like pair it with something else, like a meditation. I'll use some red light therapy, something else, so that I can just kind of double stack my time, if you will. But it's a really, really, really great therapy. It's been used in like tons of cancer clinics. It's one of, I think, the best detoxification things that we can do.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And I'll link, you said, the free course was
Ashleytaylorwellness on Instagram. It's in her link tree. I can always find it and send it to you.
Okay. We'll link that in the show notes. So anybody listening can check that out. Cool. Okay. Coffee. Anything else?
Lifestyle wise, I love the castor oil packs, but that doesn't necessarily stop the end, or like that's not necessarily going to help like pass anything. Not really.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's certain herbs, like wormwood's an herb, like you can use like cilantro and parsley, things like that help kind of bind heavy metals, the pumpkin seeds, like I said. But I mean, whole food's great. I mean, but sometimes like when people especially like are really struggling, like a lot of people have tried a lot of those things. So at least the population I'm working with, like we're working with a little bit more heavy hitting of the modalities. But there definitely are lifestyle things like that I do on a daily basis, like those things, all those things I just mentioned, that like when I'm not working through this, I'm just supporting my body, supporting your immune system, supporting your stomach acid with things like apple cider vinegar, B12, like eating high quality meat, because ideally stomach acid will kill these things that we're eating. So that's really important too.
Yeah. And then I guess another question would be like, what are like the most common symptoms of having a parasite, for example? Are there any that you know that are just like people are like, or like people tell you these symptoms, you're like, okay, yeah, you definitely have parasite.
Teeth grinding and jaw tension is by far the most common. And anal itching, especially around a full moon. Like, I know that's weird. Most people like don't want to admit that they do that. If they do that, which no judgment, like it helps me figure out what the heck's going on. Eczema, huge. Like, especially like when I was working through my parasite cleanse in the beginning, like when I first started doing it, I kind of had like dermatitis on my chin, and I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Acne, like my husband just broke out, like he had a breakout, and I was like, Nick, it's becoming a full moon. You're not following the parasite protocol adequately, and this is what you get. I was a little bit more sympathetic than that, but like certain symptoms, like especially around a full moon, that could potentially be when symptoms get worse.
And why? Can you explain why, like around a full moon, like what that even means? Yeah.
So it has to do with the serotonin, like our serotonin production, and like we are maybe dreaming a little bit more vividly, like just like essentially with the full moon and how it's affecting our hormones, like serotonin, it causes them to, for some reason, just be more active. It's the weirdest thing. Like people are like, that's so like woo woo, but I mean, it's crazy. Like when I'm like, are your symptoms worse at a certain time of the month? And most people, like, they're not paying attention to when a full moon is, but like, they'll be like, yeah, like it kind of is worse at a certain time. And I'm like, okay, pay attention to that. And they'll be like, oh yeah, it kind of was worse at a full moon. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I mean, most people wouldn't be like, they don't know. Most people aren't paying attention to that stuff like that. I am. I'm like, okay, when's the next full moon? I'm paying attention. So now that's something that people can pay attention to. But so that's for some, because they're more active during that time, that's always a good time to just kind of get rid of them.
Got it. Okay, cool. Awesome. So I feel like there's so many questions I want to ask. One question I had before, because you did mention about probiotics and prebiotics, and then also I want to ask you about digestive enzymes, which I feel like we could do a podcast on each of those things, but those are definitely things that people get confused about in terms of, like, for example, probiotics. There's so many different kinds out there. People are like, are these even useful? Like, how do I know if I should take one? Or is it even something that I should consider, or is there other things I should be doing? So maybe we can just chat a little bit about probiotics. So we don't have to go like super down the rabbit hole, but just kind of like general, like, what are you looking for if you even want to, consider taking probiotic, and, why you would do that?
I personally look for spore based, because most probiotics, if they're not already dead in the bottle, they're going to be dead by the time they hit your stomach acid, just because like, hopefully our stomach acid is pretty strong. There are some studies that show that even if they are dead, they are creating a positive effect, which is pretty interesting. I don't know to what extent it's like creating a positive effect, but I do know that I have found more benefit from spore based. So what spore based means is essentially it's dormant. The probiotic is not living, it's not dead, it's just dormant, and it becomes activated in the large intestine. And it's very similar to like the probiotics that we would find out in nature, right? Like that are living in the soil, like soil-based organisms are spore-based. So that's kind of why I like it. It's also a little bit more primitive. Like it just makes more sense than like, that's what we truly would have been exposed to. So that's what I look for. I personally use Microbiome Labs. They have a really, really great MicroSporeBiotic. That's what I use. And I love it. I also I've used the one from Cellcore before, CT Spore, it's called. Both of those are practitioner grade lines. So you just need to have like a practitioner to work with them. I do have the Microbiome one, like on my website. And then Thrive Market, I believe also has or not Thrive Market, Thrive period, like Thrive, not Market, but they have a spore based one as well. And I just find that like people get a lot more actual benefit. And I think when people think of probiotics, they're like, oh, it's like repopulating my gut. And that's not really how probiotics work. They more so work is like they're going through and they're like doing their work as they're going through, and they're not necessarily like staying and like making camp. Like they're not hanging out. They're just kind of like, as they're going through your intestines, they're doing their work, decreasing inflammation, helping to heal leaky gut, and kind of like helping to get rid of like bad bugs, but they're not necessarily like repopulating. Some ones will, but that's why it's really great if you can have probiotic rich foods in your diet and really focusing on prebiotic rich foods, which help feed the good bacteria that you hopefully have in your gut already.
Okay. And what would be some examples of prebiotic and probiotic rich foods, just for everybody listening?
So probiotic, I think of like anything fermented. So yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, certain types of pickles, kombucha. You just want to look for low sugar. I make my own because I can dictate how sweet or bitter it is. Bitter is always better. Apple cider vinegar with the mother is really great because it's going to have like that natural occurring. What am I missing? Kimchi, sauerkraut. Those are kind of the biggies. Probably I'm missing one, but those are like the big
pickled stuff, like pickled.
Yeah, like anything pickled, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And then for prebiotic things like asparagus, leafy greens, beets, carrots, like anything that's really got good substantial fiber that can really help feed, because those bacteria like love certain types of fiber. That's essentially like food for them. So that's kind of how you can think about it. Not only are you eating for food for you, but you're also eating for food for your gut microbiome.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, definitely lots of practical tips there. I had a question and then I just forgot it.
I hate when that happens.
I know, right? I'm like, like I have so many questions and it's like, I gotta pick one. Okay, so going back to, digestive enzymes. So I wanted to ask you about that. So what's your take on digestive enzymes? Do you think they're useful? Not kind of give us
your... I definitely think they can be useful. I don't think I think a lot of people use them as a crutch. Like we want to address like why your digestion is struggling, but like they can definitely be useful, like especially, for heavier meals, or like if you eat out or if you eat something you don't typically have, like they can definitely be really helpful supplementally. But I just think like if you are going to use them, it's just important to address like why do these benefit me? Like what is struggling, so that you can still like get to the root cause and not just like be completely reliant on those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And are there any, because there's so many different ones out there, right, in terms of digestive enzymes and how they can help different things. Like, for example, if you're struggling to digest protein, like taking protease, or like what, a lot of people are not familiar with that. So is that something you can just chat about a little bit, like the differences?
Sure. I really like ones that are more whole food based. I find those to be super beneficial. So like Standard Process makes a really good whole food based one, just because it's like literally the extracts coming from like foods that are just naturally high in digestive enzymes. and kind of creating that. So it's a little bit more natural in a sense, because I do worry that if people overdo digestive enzymes, like that our body can be more reliant on that and not make enough ourselves, which I do see that happen where people like they take them all the time and then their body really kind of struggles to make it. Like we start making it in our mouth, you start making like amylase and lipase to break down fats and carbs like right in your mouth. And so like if we're immediately just taking digestive enzymes, sometimes that can kind of hinder that process, but I'm not against them by any means. Like I use them. I have some in my cupboard that like if I'm eating something, like a lot of fiber or, something that I just know that my body might need a little bit more support, I add it in, but I don't make it as a crutch. Cause if I am like relying on it, then I need to think why am I struggling in the first place? Like what am I eating that's giving me a hard time? Like how can I support myself?
Yeah. Yeah. And not even like what you're eating, but how you're eating too. Cause I know for sure, like for me, if I am not like if I'm just eating and I'm like thinking about something else, I was like talking to someone the other day about this and I was like, I literally don't even remember eating my meal. And that's something that I'm trying to continue to be so aware of. And it's something that like, you have to just continuously like check in with yourself. Like you sit down to your meal and you're like, okay, like, am I literally paying attention to chewing the food, like in a calm place, not chugging, liquids while I'm eating and, all of that. So I feel like there's so many like little things that you can do before even touching digestive enzymes that a lot of people just don't realize. Right. So yeah, maybe you can just chat about that a little bit if you've seen.
Oh my gosh. No, that was, I'm really glad that you brought that up because that's the most important thing is like the lifestyle. Like, are you driving and eating? Are you working and eating? Are you like not being mindful? Because that's like, we start to like, why do you think you salivate when you're cooking a good meal and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to eat this. It's cause like, that's literally your digestive process starting as you're cooking. But we completely turn that off when we're like on our computer and we're like a workaholic and we're eating and it's like, oh, and then you're like, 2 hours later, you're starving because your body, like you never even registered that you ate in the first place. And so like, that's just like the most frustrating thing because it's like, we can do these things for free, for literally free, for nothing. Like being mindful when you eat, turn the TV off, turn your computer off. If you need something, like turn some like calming music on, like being present in the cooking process. Like I'm not saying you have to spend 20 minutes in the kitchen, but like when I'm cooking eggs in the morning or whatever, it's like, like the aromas, like that's immediately starting your digestive enzymes. So just like being more present in that aspect, but then also like sitting down, your phone's not on, you're not scrolling through Instagram, you're not looking at what Susie posted on Facebook, you're not watching like the Real Housewives of New Jersey, you're literally just like, you're eating, like period, you're eating, because then you're like, oh, I can taste this. And like, you could just like actually enjoy your meal. And I'm not saying, again, you have to sit there, like, you don't have to like sit there for 30 minutes, but like being mindful, making sure you're chewing your food, like 20 to 30 bites. And also, like you said, not drinking a lot of water, because water is going to dilute our stomach acid, which is how we're digesting our food. So I'm not, and people like are always so like, well, then when am I supposed to drink my water? They come at me like so triggered when I say that. They're like, well, tell me when I'm supposed to drink my water. I'm like, well, if you're eating every 2 hours, that's your first mistake. And then I'm like, okay, you maybe have like 4 to 8 ounces, whatever you need to do to kind of like have it with your meal. But like, if you can really limit water intake, like that's one of the best things that you can do. And honestly, I noticed a huge difference with that. We don't drink a ton of water with our meal. And like I usually will have like some, a half hour before if I need any and like an hour after, but like that really makes the biggest difference. So much of this stuff is free. It just really goes down to like mindfulness.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one tip too that I give people too, because they're like, oh, well, this person told me to drink a huge glass of water before I ate so that it would fill my stomach up a little bit more so that I would eat less. And I'm like, yeah, like that is, because sometimes a lot of people can, interpret hunger for thirst sometimes, right? So, but like you said, like have a big glass of water like half an hour before, and then, like you said, an hour after. It doesn't need to be like right before. But just there's like little things, and sometimes we hear these things and we're like, oh, well, this person said to do that, and then this person's saying the opposite. And it's like, all right, well, let's bring it back and like, okay, what's most practical with your situation? And what makes the most sense. So the last question I want to ask, because you mentioned this too, and I this is one of the ones that I forgot about like 10 minutes ago when I was thinking about all the questions I wanted to ask. So low stomach acid, I feel like that's something that is a topic that, is thrown around. Like, how do we know if we have low stomach acid? Like, what are some symptoms and how do you mitigate that?
So acid reflux is a common one. Like most people are prescribed like a PPI or a proton pump inhibitor for stomach or for GERD or gastric reflux. But like I'd say 90% of cases, it's actually low stomach acid that people are experiencing. It's very rare that people have too much, I find. And so then what do PPIs do? They completely mitigate any stomach acid that you would have had. They really are weakening it. So then you're depleting your vitamins, you're not absorbing the food that you're eating. And people sometimes are on these for like 6+ months when you really only should be on them for 3 months max. So that's a whole issue in itself. Most people are B vitamin deficient, especially B12, especially if you don't eat meat. And in a vegan diet, obviously, like you want to make sure you're supplementing, but some supplements don't get absorbed or digested well. So that's just important to note. We need B12 to make hydrochloric acid. Other symptoms that you might have, like undigested food in your stool, you might have like burping or belching. You might notice that you're more bloated or more gassy. Those tend to be like really, really common ones that I noticed. Or I'm trying to think of the other one. Maybe that's it. Or that's all that was on my mind. Maybe I didn't have another one. It's been a long day and it's only 2:00.
Yeah, no worries.
Or my time. But so those, I mean, stomach acid is a big one. A lot of people struggle. We don't make enough. Like stress is depleting stomach acid, like big time. Drinking a lot of fluids with your meal, like eating very frequently, snacking all the time. Like those are things that are constantly depleting our enzymes and our stomach acid that is going to therefore make it harder to continue digesting our food.
Mm-hmm. So how would you what would kind of be the first step to help support stomach acid production?
So some people can supplement with like a HCl supplement or like HCl plus B12, like that can be helpful for like restoring some stomach acid. I really like using apple cider vinegar. That's a really great way to help produce stomach acid, really adding in some good quality B vitamins to make sure that like you're actually able to make the stomach acid. You can add in like additional kind of support, like there's additional like butane HCl, like different kind of categories of all that stuff. But like that stuff can be helpful. But again, we're not using it as a crutch. We just want to help you make more of it. Mitigating water with meals. Like I swear by apple cider vinegar. I find so much benefit with it in people that I work with that like, and it's whole food and it's inexpensive. Like you can even make it. I have some downstairs that I'm making. It takes forever to ferment, but it's really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I use apple cider vinegar in like my salad dressings all the time. I don't necessarily like chug it in the morning. I used to do that. Like when I was going through all the different things, trying everything out, take a shot of apple cider vinegar in the morning. I don't necessarily do that anymore, but just like adding it into like your foods, right? Having, adding it in. I know when I make bone broth, like I'll add apple cider vinegar because that also helps pull all the nutrients out of the bones, right? And then, like I said, salad dressing, things like that, just using it as a vinegar source in the foods that you're cooking. So there's so many different ways to add it and you don't have to just like chug it.
Totally.
If you don't, for a lot of people, that's not very pleasant.
Right.
So yeah. Okay. Last, and I swear this is the last question. This just kind of came up because I know when I was younger and my stomach started hurting, and this is like when I was young and I didn't know anything about anything, I would just like pop some Pepto Bismol and I'm like, okay, this is going to take care of it. Can we just like unpack that a little bit? Like what even is Pepto Bismol and like, what does it do? Like, why do people, it's a kind of like, I think of it as like ibuprofen. Like you have a headache, you take ibuprofen. Like you have a stomach ache, you take Pepto Bismol. Like why is that evolved to be the thing?
I have no idea. Honestly, I really don't. Like, I never really understood that. It's like, it's kind of like the PPI. It's like, it's literally kind of, it's like a Band-Aid, but at the same time, it's like not really fixing even the root cause. Like if you have a stomach ache and you take that, like you're weakening your stomach acid. So I don't even really know why it's like become the thing, but I just think of like all those commercials.
Yeah.
Pepto Bismol or like whatever. They just like know that's like, oh, you have an upset stomach, take Pepto Bismol. It's like ingrained in people's brains, but I never really, I think I took it one time. I think that's it. But yeah, I really truly don't understand why it helps. And I think that's why it doesn't help people long-term, because like, they're like, yeah, I've tried taking it and then it doesn't work anymore. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's not actually fixing why your stomach's bothering you. It's literally like a quick fix. That's then stopped fixing things, you know?
Yeah. Like it's masking some of the symptoms for like a period of time. But I honestly, I remember having like my backpack in high school, I would keep like ibuprofen and Pepto Bismol like packets, you know? And then I think about like all the shit that I ate and I'm like, okay, well that probably made sense.
I know.
So yeah, I just wish, I wish I would have known more when I was growing up. And, that's something too, and we can wrap this. Yeah. Right. We can wrap this up too. Cause it's like, if we have any, parents listening to the podcast or, moms or dads or whatever, it's always just really good to kind of take this information and be like, okay, how can, maybe I wasn't able to implement this myself, but like, how can I implement this in my kids' lives? Right. And I think that's a huge piece that, I wish that like my parents had a podcast like this to listen to. Right. So, it's not too late for you, but it's also, take these things and don't get too, this is one thing too, like I know I personally gone through periods of time where I'm like, get so focused on like, oh my God, like I might have a parasite. So I need to like go down all these rabbit holes and like, then I forget about all the other stuff. And it's like, okay, no, like take a step back, like figure out, you personally, are you having specific symptoms? Like, are you having issues that you need to address with different, there's so many different things that are going on, but just like taking a step back and not like feeling like you have to like throw everything out or start over. Like there's all these different ways to kind of address different things. So I think just being overwhelmed is the first, that's going to just add more stress. And then that's going to be a whole other situation. Right. So, so just kind of taking the information with, I would say, a grain of salt in the sense of like how it affects you, and then kind of going back about it in a way that you're able to, if like something we said, for example, the coffee enemas thing, like if that's something that you're interested in, like go check out that free course and, learn more about it. Don't just start, doing stuff because you heard it on a podcast, right? So I always like to kind of preface that, because I know sometimes people come back to me after listening to podcasts and they're like, oh my God, like I heard all this stuff and like I'm trying to change all this. I'm like, no, like chill out for a second,
Small steps. And like once you're informed, like then you can start making these changes to do better. It's not like you have to completely uproot your life right now,
Exactly.
It's a journey for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. All right. Well, this was awesome. Our first episode was all about hormones and birth control. So again, if you haven't listened to that one, I'll link it in the show notes. Do you want to tell everybody where they can find you on social media, your website, any programs or anything that you have?
Sure. So I am most active on Instagram at Dr. Halie Schoff. You can follow along with my business at alpha.chiro.health.wellness. And then my website, super easy, drhalieschoff.com. My membership is there, which I actually just a few weeks ago uploaded a parasite protocol and gut protocol within my online membership. I have a gut and bloating masterclass that's in the resources tab on my website. So lots of great stuff there. And then I've also done a lot of podcasts on, I just did one on parasites, and then just a lot on like gut health, autoimmunity, really helping to kind of like fix your gut. I believe it's episode 2 of my podcast. Like it was an OG, but it's like still like one of the most listened to podcasts, and that's Alpha Health and Wellness Radio.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. Well, we'll for sure link all of that in the show notes, podcast, website, all that jazz. So if you're interested in, learning more about gut health, all of the things that we just talked about, definitely, check out Dr. Halie's podcast. I know I've listened to a bunch of episodes. And I've referred some of my clients to some of your episodes too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And we all kind of have our different areas of expertise, right? And like for me, for example, like gut health and that and acne and all of that is not my area of expertise. So I always, want to refer to people who have been doing this for a while and like understand those things. So, and have those resources available. So, yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you. Yeah. And thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll have to do a part 3 down the line. We'll think of another topic to chat about.
Definitely. We'll see what the listener questions are, and we can always dive into something. I definitely have to have you back on mine too. So yeah, we will definitely be connected.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of MetFlex and Chill. I hope you enjoyed it. It would be awesome if you could give the show 5 stars and leave a review on iTunes. We're trying to get placed in the top 100 health podcasts, and the 5-star ratings and reviews are what can help make that happen. I'll add step-by-step directions for leaving a review in the show notes. I know it's a big ask, but it really helps. Thanks again. See you next time.